We're absolutely delighted that Professor Parry Guilford and Associate Professor Karyn Paringatai, both from the University of Otago, can be with us tonight to talk about their research. Back in May, Parry's team, the Hereditary Diffuse Gastric Cancer team, won the prestigious Prime Minister's Science Prize. Not all the team can be here tonight, but we would like to acknowledge the other team members, and they are Erin Gardner, Dr. Jeremy Rossack, Pauline Harawira, and Mabel McLeod. The format for tonight is relaxed and informal. Parry and Karyn will be asked some questions, grilled, I'm told, by my two colleagues. And after the discussion, which will be about 45 minutes, we will then give you the opportunity to ask questions for another 4.5 hours. I made that up. No, not for that long. Before we start the discussion, we thought it might be interesting for you to watch the video that was made for the Prime Minister's Science Prizes, the awards ceremony. And this will give you some context before we start that discussion.
Kia ora, my name is Parry Guilford. I'm a cancer genetic researcher from the University of Otago. This project was one which started off in about 1994 when a large whānau from the Bay of Plenty realised that their very high rate of stomach cancer in their family was caused by a gene and not by a curse.
I'm Mabel McLeod. I was a nurse in Nelson. My cousin had died. She was my age at the time. She was 28, and I came back and just thought something wasn't right.
They could see in their whānau that there was something happening, that they didn't have the expertise themselves to fully understand. So that's when they contacted Parry Guilford from the University of Otago.
It was quite a long process. We were interviewed several times. They didn't really like the look of me. I was a bit too young. Fortunately, after numerous cups of tea, we managed to kind of reach a consensus and really build a relationship which was purely, in my view, based on trust.
There was over 100 people volunteered for this. Within maybe a year and a half, it was discovered.
So by using linkage analysis followed by DNA sequencing, we're able to show that a gene called CDH1 was the cause of cancer in this family. People who have a mutation in the CDH1 gene are recommended to have a total gastrectomy, which means to have their entire stomach removed.
The gastrectomy is it's a big operation and it's a difficult operation for patients. However, it is the only chance of cure or prevention of getting stomach cancer.
I bring to this project the experience of being someone with the CDH1 gene who has had a gastrectomy 13 years ago. And at that time there was barely any information out there about how to best support Māori whānau going through this process. And so I've come down the middle to kind of join those two sides together a little bit more and incorporate Māori knowledge, te reo, tikanga, to provide better services and care.
I think what we do isn't rocket science in Māoridom. We do what we do like we would do it on a marae. We cater for the whole whānau. And so the clinical teams have been really great about embracing how we like to work. And so in that sense, it's been really great.
We estimate that in New Zealand there are about 400 to 450 people whose lives have been saved by this mutation. In Europe and the US together, probably around about 27,000 people will have had their lives saved in the next few years. So it's a story which has gone from one small whānau Māori just outside Tauranga to a global story affecting thousands and thousands of people, and it's been for me an utter privilege to be part of this for most of my working life.
People think it's unfortunate that you get the gene, but today I heard, no, it's not unfortunate. It's fortunate because we know, and we know how to deal with it.
Wow, welcome Parry and Karyn. This is our 6th talk. It's been a blast, hasn't it? We've had a lot of fun. We've been to Palmerston North, Timaru, Christchurch, Wellington, where else? Napier? Dunedin. Yeah, we were in Dunedin on Wednesday night. It's been a lot of fun, and the audience have seemed to enjoy the format. So we'll start Parry, let's first start off with you talking about your background and your journey in working with genetics and cancer.
My background was initially in plant virology, and but then I moved to Paris and got a job at the Institut Pasteur, where my job was to try and find genes for human deafness. In those days, it was back in the mid-90s, there were no known genes for human deafness, and this is recessive type deafness. And so we used the French colonial network, which included the deserts of Tunisia, to find consanguineous families in those regions who had very high rates of deafness. So I was taken there and put in the back of a van and driven all over the desert, and we took blood samples from people from little villages all over the place in Tunisia, took them back to the lab in Paris and mapped the first genes for inherited deafness. And that gave me the basics and how to try and find genes for human disease. So I came back to New Zealand. I was quite comfortable in Paris, but I found myself on the weekends going down to the river and just looking at the water, and I'm thinking, well, there's something wrong here. I should be in the Musée d'Orsay or doing something like that, but I was down by the river and I thought maybe I'm missing home, and so I did come home, and I tried to get a job in Dunedin with Professor Tony Reeve. He said, no, mate, there's nothing going on at the moment. We can maybe write together a grant together sometime, but there's nothing at the moment. I went back to Auckland, and within a week or two, I had a phone call from Tony. He said, look, I just had a phone call from a woman called McLeod, and she described this history of stomach cancer in her family, which is incredible. He said, you know how to find genes, maybe you should do this. And from there we went, Tony and I flew to Tauranga a few days later and met with the whānau for the first time and started to kind of discuss how we could perhaps work together to try and find the cause of cancer in the family.
He doesn't even need us now. We don't even have to ask the question. So I think we have to skip a few, and then we'll go to... So, yeah, can you actually go into how did you get the trust of the whānau, and then also what other legal protection did you provide?
Yeah, so we had to spend a lot of time with the whānau trying to get to know each other, because in my view, and I think as I said in that video, the whole relationship was underpinned by trust or driven by trust and relied on trust. We had to understand each other's viewpoints. We had to have, most importantly, a shared vision. And that was what I think kept the whole thing together for such a long time, so we all believed in the same final goal. We had no other agendas to find other genes or do anything else. Our simple goal was to find the cause of cancer in the family and then try and find a way to stop that. But of course that was a fairly ethereal way to do it, just by feelings and emotions. So we had to have a legal contract as well. And so we drafted up a contract where we outlined the various roles of people in the project. So I had defined roles in the lab, and the whānau had their own defined roles. And so, for example, I wasn't supposed to go and approach family members to get information or try and get an extra blood sample. I was to do my lab work, and they would give me the samples. We defined aspects of tikanga. We defined intellectual property issues. We asked for our right to publish the research, because it was important to us that the story just didn't start and stop with one whānau. It had to be available to the entire world. So of course they agreed to us publishing the research. But that was the underwrite that we had, which sat below the notion of trust and friendship and shared vision. Fortunately, we never had to fall back on that contract. We did get by with the relationship side of things, but it was certainly good to have that.
Yeah, certainly that sort of data sovereignty idea and just really making sure that it's all everything's, yeah. So, okay, so you get the go ahead, everyone's keen, so tell us, what samples did you get, and then how did you actually approach finding this gene?
So we got, when I say we, this is one of the jobs of the whānau, was to get the samples, and they got about 100 blood samples from people from the whānau. So lots and lots of people were engaged with the project and gave us samples. But of course the cancer is so aggressive that not many people were alive with the cancer. We saw maybe one or two alive with the cancer, but everyone had died really quickly after diagnosis, and so there were no blood samples from those people. So to get DNA from affected family members, we had to go to the hospital and get access to archival tissues, so formalin-fixed, paraffin-embedded samples, which were kept after surgery. So most of these people had at some point had an attempt at surgery to remove the tumour, to extend their lives a little bit, and so there were leftover specimens which were stored in the hospital. So we got about 30 or 35 tumour samples from people in the hospital, from the hospital. And then one further sample was a Guthrie card. So there was one boy who was 14 years of age when he died from advanced stomach cancer. And he died very quickly. There was no attempt at any surgery, so there was no archive tissue in the hospital. But he had, like we all have had, a Guthrie card taken when he was born. So a little heel prick to get a drop of blood and to test for metabolic disorders. We were able to access his Guthrie card somehow, and it was in a shoebox in a basement of a hospital somewhere, and we managed to, someone had the wherewithal to find that and send us this Guthrie card from this 14-year-old boy. And we used that along with the other samples to map the gene and eventually find the gene. So to find genes for human disease, it's not too hard in principle. So you get people from the family who don't have the cancer, and you get people from the family who do have the cancer. And then you break up the genome into bite-sized chunks, and you ask a question with each chunk. Is this bit of DNA shared by all the people with the cancer and pretty much different to most people without the cancer? And so you do that for one chunk, and the answer is almost always no. And so you go to the next chunk, and you keep on going through the whole genome. So you can do it that way. You can start at the top of chromosome 1 and work your way through all the chromosomes to the end of chromosome 22, little bit of chunks, asking that question every single time. But we were really nervous that we didn't have enough DNA to do a whole genome analysis. That was because the paraffin-embedded samples that we had, the archive specimens we had, a lot of them were really old, like 25, 30 years old, and so the quality of DNA in those samples wasn't very good. It was quite degraded because it had been stored for so long. So we were really worried that we wouldn't have enough DNA to go through the entire genome. So we took the approach of what's called a candidate gene approach, which is when you basically come up with a list of genes you think could, in principle, cause the cancer. And so you go down to the library, you sit in the library, and you read all the journals you can find until you come up with a list of genes which, in theory, could cause inherited diffuse gastric cancer. So we had a list of about 30 or 40 genes to look at, and I must admit, in hindsight, at the time I looked at that list and I thought, man, these aren't very good. I don't feel good about this. I think we'll go through this list in no time at all. We won't find anything. The DNA will have run out, and we will be stuck in a really bad place. But fortunately, the gene CDH1 was on our list. It was about number 8 on our list, and we were able to quite quickly show that it was causing the disease, and we confirmed that by direct DNA sequencing and found a particular mutation in this family, which we soon confirmed in other Māori families as well.
And what is it about this gene that can cause stomach cancer, and can it cause any other types of cancer?
Yeah, it's the gene CDH1 encodes a protein called ecadherin, which is a cell-to-cell adhesion protein. So what it does is it holds cells together, but also controls cell polarity, which is a way of a cell knowing which way is up and which way is down. So cells have specialised functions. They do some things on one surface and other things on another surface. So they need to know up from down, left, well, not left from right, certainly up from down. And so when ecadherin is lost, so CDH1 is mutated, ecadherin is lost, cells also lose their polarity because they're not holding on to neighbouring cells properly, and so they lose their sense for up and down. That also impacts on how they divide. So cells which are going to divide normally do it very neatly in the epithelial plane, very organised process, divide across that plane. But when a cell has lost its sense of up or down, when it divides, it doesn't divide neatly in that plane, so cells will end up in the wrong place. So a cell will divide and it will end up below the basement membrane where it's away from its normal controls, and it will start to grow in an abnormal fashion, doesn't get its normal feedback, and in time it will get bigger and bigger and bigger, undergo some more mutations and take off to advanced disease.
Thanks, Parry. You've had your grilling now.
Can I go now?
So, Karyn, this research is very special and personal to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as you would have heard in the video, I do have the CDH1 gene, and I have had a total prophylactic gastrectomy in 2010. And I really, when the opportunity came up to work with Parry on this, he's my AI on this project, which is really nice, to be able to better understand, I guess, whānau experiences of dealing with this gene and with the surgery and everything that goes with it. I just jumped at it because the McLeods saved my life. Parry also saved my life, but the McLeods did too. And so our story is quite intertwined. So my father died in 2007 of the other major Māori killer, a heart attack, and we buried him in Invercargill. And then 2 years later, we did his kawemate. So we took him spiritually back home to the east coast of the North Island, about as far east as you can get in this country. And at that time, my aunties said to me, there's this genetic mutation lurking in our whakapapa, and you need to go get tested. And we only knew about that because not long before we did Dad's kawemate, one of my cousins had passed away of diffuse gastric cancer. And so how we're related is that her grandmother and my grandfather are brother and sister. Her grandmother, her mother, her sister had all passed away of diffuse gastric cancer. And so when she presented to the hospital in Tauranga with complaints soon after the birth of her third child, they put it down to reflux. And so they sent her home for over a period of about 3 or 4 months, just constantly saying it's reflux, trying all these different medications. She also didn't offer up any information about her whānau medical histories, because I think if they had, being in Tauranga, they would have tested straight away for CDH1, for stomach cancer, and might have been able to save her life, or at least prolong it, because she passed away not long after her diagnosis. I say that it's really lucky that she passed away in Tauranga, because she came under the fold of Kimi Hauora, under Maybell and Pauline, not Erin at that time, I don't think. And so really lucky that Kimi Hauora wrapped that support around her husband, and her 3 young children. She left 2 children under 2. And when she passed away, they were also part of the group that took her back home to the east coast for her tangihanga. And not long after that, they held a meeting with my whānau Parry. It was there in Gisborne, and that's how we came to learn of the gene in our whānau.
So what was it like for you when you learnt that you had this gene?
Yeah, I found out on a Friday afternoon, and it just happened to be staff drinks, and I went and got drunk. And I think I downed a bottle of wine pretty quickly. It was a bit weird, because I'd never really had much to do with my dad's whānau. Both his parents had passed away in the early 1980s, and so I was about 3 years old when that happened. And while we used to go back, he used to take us back before they passed away. When they died, he decided there was no point in going back. So I hadn't really had that much interaction with my whānau, and I thought, of all the things that could connect me back to them, it's this genetic mutation. For me, it's been... Once I got over the initial shock and kind of made those decisions to have a prophylactic gastrectomy the following year, it really became the thing that has driven our whole entire whānau to be more connected with each other. And so over the past 15 years, we have been more deliberate in our interaction with each other, We've travelled up there almost every single year. I've just come back from Gisborne. Actually, I got stuck up there after Napier. I forgot to tell you. Got stuck up in Gisborne after our Napier event last week, and my flights got cancelled. So I thought, oh well, it's meant to be. And so we've been a lot more deliberate. One of my younger cousins is now studying at Otago, and we've just co-authored our first journal article together as an 18-year-old. So that's really exciting about our interactions with our marae. 18 versus 40 plus. And so it's been really, the initial shock, it is what it is, but to know that if I didn't know about this gene, I most likely would not be sitting here today.
So tell us a little bit about after the surgery, how has it affected your life in the way of eating, for example? What can you eat? What do you have instead of a stomach now?
That's a lot of questions. So my favourite question to be asked is, how do you eat? And I reply, with my mouth, the same as you. So they took some of my intestines and attached it to the bottom of my esophagus and the top of my duodenum. So I don't have a stomach, I have what I call the tube. And so now my intestines have to do two jobs of processing the food and then absorbing it. So it doesn't absorb as much as what people with stomachs are able to absorb. So the idea is supposed to be eating more regularly, smaller meals. I don't. I'm a mum, so sometimes meals are the kids' leftovers. Sometimes they're not that nutritious when it's chicken nuggets and chips for dinner. So, but that's not often, and I used to really struggle with trusting my body, trusting how it would react to certain things, and that was the biggest struggle, was knowing how, if I could go out in public again and have dinner with friends at a restaurant, because I didn't know how my body was going to react to those situations. And so I started to withdraw, and that's really hard for us as Māori, and everything revolves around food. I've just submitted a student internship for my cousin to do our food identity back up on the East Coast. So everything revolves around food, and so when we don't enjoy that process anymore, we start to withdraw, and culturally it was quite damaging. So I had to suck it up and just go back to the basics of eating smaller meals, not overdoing it when I'm out, just because I still eat with my stomach eyes.
Because looking at you, you look the picture of health, you really do. And it's not like that for everyone, is it, that has this big operation? Parry, can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I'll also add, though, that Karyn has the advantage. She doesn't get butterflies. And so we can sit there, I can be nervous, waiting to get on the podium. She's sitting there all relaxed because she doesn't get butterflies. Literally, doesn't get butterflies. So the operation is, Karyn has mentioned, hinted at having a harder time at the start, but everyone has a tough first 6 months and probably even a tough year, really. And then they head towards a new normal. But some people have a terribly difficult time. And we're acutely aware of this now, but we haven't always been. So we would, after we started the project, would go back to Tauranga quite a lot and would start to talk to the people who came to our meetings about, how are you getting on without a stomach? And they'll go, oh yeah, it's just choice, it's really good, way better than being dead, and everyone's happy and no issue at all. And so we got a very strong impression that life without a stomach was a piece of cake. Rough start, but then
cake.
Just really easy. But then one of our students had a opportunity to go up to Tauranga and interview members of the whānau who, in their own homes, and so rather than us calling the meeting and people who felt well enough to come along, she went to their homes and exposed the ascertainment bias that had been fooling me for so long. These people, they were younger, and so they had a different kind of story, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but they weren't doing as well. They were really having a slow recovery. They were, I wouldn't say resentful, but some of them thought, man, this is just way harder than I thought it was going to be, and I'm really struggling with this, and it'd be great in 2 years' time, 3 years' time maybe, but man, it's not easy now. And the other big difference was that now the younger ones have not seen the death that their parents saw. So their parents lost their mum and dad, or dad. They lost lots of siblings. They lost dozens of cousins. But the young ones have seen no death from stomach cancer. It's because of this operation, because of the surveillance. There's been no deaths in these families, or very rarely, for many, many years. And so the young generation haven't seen the death. So they get told to go, and they get told, well, they're gone, but the whānau, the kuia say, go and have your stomach out, you got the mutation, and they're good kids, so they go and do that in time. But they don't have that same level of commitment that the generation before had, because they haven't seen the death. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, that crowd over there will certainly know, the clinician people here, that if you're going to have a really serious medical procedure, you really have to have your mind and body right behind this procedure. You really have to want to have it. You must have decided it's the right thing for you to do, and then you'll have a better recovery than had you not been fully involved in decision making here, had you not been fully behind the operation. So we're seeing this next generation coming through who, although they're kind of getting there in time, they're having slower recoveries because they haven't seen the death, and they just don't quite get it to the same level as their parents did.
So is there counselling for, these people that have had the stomach operation? Or?
No, there's not really. I mean, there's a thing called genetic counselling, which is not counselling as we know it. It's just to really inform people about the basic facts of inheritance, of the mutation, and the procedures you could consider to take to minimise your risk. But there's no counselling for the stress, the emotional pressure at all, really, and it's something we'd really like to change in the future.
Yeah, and I guess until I came on board and started doing this research and working with our PhD student, Kahurangi Tipene, no one had talked to these people about their experiences and what they were feeling. And so we didn't know that this was a problem until the last couple of years. And even now the surgeons are having these conversations all around the country with these young ones, and they are identifying it as a really big problem. It's very different if you've got cancer, then you've got oncologists and you've got a support system there. If you have bariatric surgery, then you've got a support system there for these things. But there's nothing for us.
Yeah, so can we talk a little bit about, how does this gene get inherited? And if you have this mutated gene, what are your chances of getting cancer, and what?
Yeah, so it's dominant autosomal inheritance pattern, which means you can inherit the gene from just one parent is required. If you inherit that gene in our large New Zealand Māori family, they have a 70% chance of developing advanced diffuse gastric cancer. They all get really early stage cancer, but 70% of them will go on to develop advanced disease if there's no intervention. There are a number of families around the world who have the same risk, very high rates of cancer, but we're seeing more and more families who have a lower risk. So there are families who have a risk of maybe 10, 20, 30% of developing advanced diffuse gastric cancer. But they also have a risk of getting lobular breast cancer. So we see now, initially we just saw stomach cancer in these families, but now we see stomach cancer and also an additional risk in women of getting lobular breast cancer.
And so why, though? Is it just stomach and breast? Why not other cancers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question. And we've got a student, Emily Sculpin, who's been working on this for quite a few years, and recently got some really strong data to suggest that it's because of compensation from other genes. And so if you lose the CDH1 protein or ecadherin protein, other proteins are turned on or upregulated, and they give some compensation for the deficit which you get when you have no ecadherin.
So in terms of the process, so what age can people get tested for the gene, and then what are the options in terms of what's the treatment or the monitoring of cancer? And
so at the moment the gene testing is done about 16 years of age, so the age of consent. We are hoping to change that. Maybe Karyn will talk about that in a moment. But so at the moment 16 years of age, and then they will start endoscopy, so surveillance endoscopy, so tube put down the throat to try and find evidence for any advancing cancers. And that will continue until such time as something is seen, or the recommendation is once they get into their 20s, they should have a complete total gastrectomy. That was always the recommendation. From the very start, it was very firm. As soon as you get to about 20, have your stomach removed, unless we find cancer before that. Now we've got a bit more relaxed about it all. We know the endoscopy is, when done by experts, and these are people who have seen this disease many times before, they can do quite a good job of finding the cancer as it develops. So we have improving technique, we've got improving skill sets, and we've also learned that the cancer is not always as aggressive as we first thought it was. It can be delayed in its onset. And as a result, the recommendation now is a bit more balanced. It's more, we think you should have a gastrectomy, but you could consider surveillance until you feel the time is right for you. So that might mean you delay surgery until you've finished university, or until you've had a family, or until you've finished travelling or got through some particular crisis in your life, I don't know. But you can choose your time. As long as you're having good quality surveillance from someone who is an expert in this syndrome, then it's probably safe to delay surgery for a number of years. But not too long, we hope.
Because this cancer is really quite hard to find, isn't it, when having an endoscopy, it's still hard to find, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's not like, in your nightmares, or my nightmares, I have all these nightmares all the time. I got a big cancer somewhere. And in my nightmare, it's always this big lumpy thing, which is kind of growing through my body, big obvious lumpy thing. But diffuse gastric cancer it's not so cohesive, and so it can spread underneath an intact stomach lining. So you can look at the stomach with an endoscope, and it looks absolutely fine. It looks smooth and nice, and no issue at all. But the cancer can be growing underneath that intact layer, and so it could be very advanced by the time it's finally diagnosed. The really good clinicians, the good endoscopists, they are starting to see it well, as I mentioned a moment ago, and they're seeing just in the mucosa a pale, flat lesion, very, very subtle, but they're starting to see it with greater success. But if someone who's a carrier goes to a centre which is not experienced with HTGC, the gastroenterologist will probably have a quick look, not see anything too obvious, and go, oh, all sweet, off you go home, when in fact there could be a cancer developing.
Yeah, and we're really lucky that Jeremy's on our team, because apart from being the surgeon, he also does endoscopies. And so for us, he's the expert in this team. And we've been really lucky that, in Dunedin, we've had a few people come and see us. And there's this beautiful family of 5 children, and 4 of them have the young adults, like 18 and above. And 4 of them have it. And they asked us to go into a meeting with the surgeon just to have some more discussions around the options. And they clearly wanted to go down the surveillance route. And the surgeon wasn't actually prepared for a conversation about that, and so it was the end result was great. And Jeremy, I offered to fly all 5 of them and their mother up to Tauranga so that they could be seen by our expert. And Jeremy kindly said, no, that's too expensive, I'll fly down to Dunedin. And so he's actually been getting out and about more and spreading this and sharing his knowledge in this space, so that we can be sure, if anyone goes to Christchurch, Dunedin, Wellington, Palmerston North, that we can say, yes, they're good, they know what they're looking for, whereas before we couldn't guarantee that.
Thanks, Karyn. Tell us a little bit about your input into this research now, and you've had a Marsden Fund which has helped with this as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you very much, Marsden Funding. Like I said in the video, when I went to have my endoscopy in 2010, I was doing a lot of, I'm a researcher, so I was getting onto the internet and looking around for any information that I could find from a New Zealand perspective around how to best support people who've gone through a prophylactic gastrectomy within New Zealand, and there was absolutely nothing. And there was nothing, even there was nothing to do with Māori as well, which I found really surprising given that the McLeods, this large whānau Māori, were the drivers, of this whole entire research project. And so I thought that was really strange, and I wondered how we could gather that information and disseminate it better for our babies. I've got 2 children who came to the Tuesday event and ran amok, but they are the reasons why I filled in that Marsden application form. Because actually that's a lie, because I was only pregnant with one of them. But to our babies, our tamariki, our mokopuna, they deserve the best knowledge and the best healthcare system. And until I started doing this project 5 years ago and actually talking to the people about their experiences, we didn't know what that looked like. And now we are getting a stronger sense about what changes, there are only subtle changes, need to happen within the system. And Parry alluded to the age of genetic testing. The approach that I had with this Marsden was that this is a whānau gene. This is not an individual gene. And so prior to its discovery, it ripped families apart. We were just talking about this earlier today at the airport, that it forced the separation of children, because when one of the parents dies and the other one is not there anyway, no one has enough space in their house to take on an extra 4 or 5 children. So they all kind of get separated into different households. So we really need to kind of understand what it has been like in order to make things better.
So can we take a look at sort of the international side of things? So firstly, obviously there's a lot of interest in what was causing this cancer, and so what was it that actually allowed, team in New Zealand to find this? And also, if you can talk about the international interest in this gene.
So when we started looking for the CDH1 gene, there were families all around the world who had high rates of stomach cancer as well, and there were research teams in different countries trying to find the gene as well. There was a big group in Portugal, there was a group in Cambridge, UK, there was a group in Canada and a group in the US, all very actively looking at the small families that they had, trying to find the gene causing the cancer. They couldn't find it because those families are too small. So from a genetics viewpoint, if you're trying to find a gene for a disease, you really need to have a big family where you get the statistical power to actually find the gene. So we had that, and that was because the whānau are huge. The first big family, the Maybell's family, since it's all been done, we've tested about 300 people, and 100 of them carry a mutation in the CDH1 gene. So these are big families. So big sibships, lots of brothers and sisters, and most importantly, they're really aware of their wider family. They know their cousins. They know their cousins, and so they can come up with a big whakapapa, a family tree, really quickly, and it's very accurate, and it's incredible from a viewpoint of a geneticist. It's an incredibly powerful resource. Unlike Pākehā families, the families are much smaller, fewer kids, and we tend not to know our cousins as well. I think half my cousins have probably died and no one's been bothered to tell me. We're just smaller and not so well connected. So we were lucky. We had this huge family and 2 other families, Māori families of similar kind of size and scale, who had the cancer, and so we were able to use genetics to find the gene. So as soon as we published it, those groups went straight to their families, tested them, and found the CDH1 mutations as well. One of the families in Portugal is shown to be absolutely incredible now, is that at the time they saw in northern Portugal 4 or 5 clusters of families, families with inherited stomach cancer, and they couldn't link them. They just thought, just by chance, 4 different families with stomach cancer. When they tested them, they found they all had the same mutation, so exactly the same mutation in the CDH1 gene. And so they started to get them to, let's try and work our way back and see if we can find a common ancestor. And they did. They worked it all the way back, and they found a common ancestor from 1665, I think it was. So that family, we call it a family, it's just massive. And there are people throughout Portugal, throughout Europe, who have mutations in that particular location in the CDH1 gene.
Because not all mutations of the gene are the same, are they? There are different mutations.
Yeah, so most families tend to have their own private mutation, not always, but some sites are a little bit more commonly mutated, but it's a chance thing. The CDH1 gene is what's called a tumour suppressor gene, and you can just break it at any point along its sequence and it wrecks it. And so mutations occur by chance, and so it happens to be a break here. And Karyn's break is at position 190 C to T change. The McLeod's was a 1008 G to T change, and so we've got, I think there's been 650 different mutations mapped around the world, and over 1,000 families.
I liken it to knitting. Parry hates this analogy. Like when you go knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, somewhere along the road has gone knit one, purl two. And you can see the mistake in the jersey. See, it works. He totally does not believe that my knitting analogy works.
Does that work, Graham?
Well, he's wearing a knitted... Oh, is he wearing a knitted jersey?
So the removal of a stomach is pretty radical, isn't it? Pretty serious stuff. And it must be really hard for people to make that decision, especially younger people. I mean, is screening becoming more sophisticated? Are there ways that, can we use a dye or something like that to show these tumours or cancers?
Screening is getting better. They aren't using a lot of dye, but they're using improved endoscopes with better resolution to see the cancers earlier. We don't have a kind of like a labelled dye yet. We've been trying. I haven't admitted this previously, but apart from maybe in Dunedin, I've raised it as a project we've had in mind for years, which is to try and find a marker on the surface of the early stage cancers and then link a fluorescent compound to it all and then inject that, and then because it's so dark in your stomach, if you look in there with an endoscope, you'll see these little stars lighting up where the cancers are. And so, I don't admit to it very often because we've made zero progress on that project. There's nothing at all.
But maybe someone here might be able to do it.
Yeah, that's right. So there has been improvement in endoscopy, but our focus in the lab has been trying to develop something called chemoprevention, which is to get drugs which will stop the cancer developing in the first place. And we're making good progress on that. We've got a number of really strong candidates we like the look of, and we're now linking them up to a compound which we can spray onto the stomach lining and carry the drug with it. And at that point, the drug is released by the acid in the stomach, and we get local uptake of the drug right on the surface of the stomach. We don't get much systemic spread of the drug, and so people can take these, have this sprayed on, and they shouldn't get the adverse side effects, which would be more expected if you gave an injection or a normal oral medication route.
I wondered what he was doing in the lab.
Of course, as you mentioned earlier, Pākehā don't have such strong whakapapa. And so there must be a lot of people walking around with this gene and they don't realise they've had it.
Yeah, so we know, it's been estimated that the 100,000 births is a CDH1 mutation. So that's the kind of global rate for HDGC, 100,000. But 4 to 5 times higher in the Maori population. So we don't know all the people. We know, I think we've got a pretty good handle on most of the Maori families here because of the same reason I mentioned, the large size of them and their well-connected nature. But we're pretty sure there are a lot of smaller Pākehā families who we have not yet identified. And it's one of the things we're going to look at with the funding we got as part of the Science Prize. We're going to try and find more of the smaller families who aren't quite so obvious.
Yeah, and I guess just following up on that, there is this kind of idea that Māori are all connected, we all know our whakapapa, but that's not simply true for all whānau. And there's been a lot of political intervention over the years from colonisation that have prevented our engagement with our whakapapa. So as I said, my father moved from the east coast of the North Island all the way down to Invercargill in the 1960s for work at the freezing works. And he was one of about 350 single males, Māori males, that made that trek every single year for seasonal work. And even if half of them stayed, we're now getting into kind of second, third, fourth generation born in the city. And the generational distance between where they are now and where they originate from in terms of iwi is quite distant. And so, they may know their aunties and uncles and grandparents, but do they know their grandparents' siblings? Do they know their great-grandparents and their siblings? So there's a lot of loss of knowledge. And then I also think of things around the closed adoption era. And there's a lot of people walking around who don't know their whakapapa, and really, again, thank the Marsden funding, because one of my colleagues in my department has received a Fast Start Marsden to explore that, because she's in her 50s and has been searching for her whakapapa her whole entire life, and just found out last year that she's Ngāti Hine because her mum was adopted in the closed adoption era. So there's all these things that have prevented our engagement. And yes, there are some huge whānau like the McLeods, but there's other whānau like mine that are really female-dominated as well. And that's just a trait of Ngāti Porou. So if you know any Ngāti Porou females, we are very stroppy, headstrong. I won't say anything else. But also, even if it was a few generations back and they're females and they're getting married, they're taking their husband's last name. And so you come down 3 generations and the knowledge of what your great-great-grandmother's maiden name was is lost.
It's almost 30 years now, so it's really such an early example of truly whānau-led research. And so for you, how has it been to be part of this research? And
so initially, my first thought was, man, there's a lot of talking going on here. There was hui after hui, and not much was happening, and time was going by, and my salary was running out, and we're still talking, and nothing much was happening. But eventually, over a period of months, the family reached a consensus to support the project, and they supported it fully from that time on. So in contrast to, I think, the more common Pākehā way, where you have a bit of a chat and then you rip into it all, and then people change their minds halfway through and it all falls over. This was a different way of doing it. So it was the kind of the socialising of the idea really happened up front, was way more extensive, and then people truly commit to the project. So I think that works extremely well, and it's certainly stood this project in good stead for a long time. There were, some small changes we had to think about in the lab, so how to take care of Māori tissues, but nothing difficult, nothing where you just ask and you would get the advice and you'd do that happily. But for me, it's been working so closely to people who need the research has just changed my view on how science can be done, and I have been deeply rewarded by this close interaction with the affected families. And for now, for me, to work in any other way doesn't feel right anymore. To me, I have to work alongside the affected families, people with illnesses, working with colleagues who are equally committed. That's, to me, is the only way to do research. You get research done which is stable and robust, and it's going to make a difference because you're working with the people who need that research.
I didn't have as much problems as Parry did. I didn't have to have hui after hui after hui for months because I have whakapapa on my side. So when I first, I did have Parry and do the introductions, but actually when we first met, Paulette, the kuia with the grey hair, she said to me, "What's your daughter's name?" And I said, Manuho Paringatai. She goes, "My brother's name was Manuho Paringatai Stainton." That's their last name. He was named after that karaua that died in World War II and is buried overseas. And I said, that's exactly who she's named after as well. And so from then on, I ticked all the right boxes, and that was after a half-hour meeting.
It's not fair. It's not fair.
Lucky last question. So, where to now? What does the future hold?
Well, the project seems to be just keeps on growing, and we have more and more questions to answer. We want to understand why some people have a high risk of the cancer, others have a lower risk, and it might be due to immune surveillance, is our top theory, frankly. And we want to try and find everyone who's at risk from this cancer in the country. We want to take better care of the people who have the mutation and who are either undergoing surveillance or have chosen to have a gastrectomy. All these things need to be done. We are also, as of a few days ago, aware of another Māori family with stomach cancer who don't have CDH1 mutation, and so clearly there's another gene out there which we need to find. We know there are other genes which modify risk, which we need to find. So it doesn't get any less. And we feel the project's getting bigger. We're starting to spin off a lot of social science ideas as well off the side of it all, and off the side of genetics. So it's just going to carry on and get bigger.
Are you developing any sort of drugs as well?
Yeah, so we're trying to get this idea of chemoprevention, so drugs to delay the development or prevent the development of the cancer, which is going well. We've now got some really strong candidates which we're putting through our preclinical models, and we're hoping to get into our first clinical trial in 3 years, maybe 4, but we're hoping for 3 at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess from my project, we've got a lot of information, a lot of good things that people have found from having their stomach removed, but also a lot of areas that we could improve on. And so over the last couple of years, I've been presenting in front of pathologists, gastroenterologists, genetic counsellors, cancer researchers, and I am a Māori studies academic. So it's a very different space for me to be in. But they find value in understanding the people that they're working with just a little bit better from our perspective, what that looks like. So there's lots of things that we can work on. They've told us that they don't like the idea of 16 being the age of genetic counselling, and they want to have a more whānau-centric approach to determining the age of testing. When we went to Portugal, it was very clear that the guidelines that were being revised were using Northern Hemisphere data, and there was absolutely no contributions to the data from Aotearoa. And so we've got some really good people in good places that are willing to come on board and step up and actually take the charge, because I am not the right person to be doing graphs and data. But I can certainly show the areas where it's of concern and pass that information, work with them to understand things better. So there's lots of stuff that we're going to do. And yeah, Marsden funding runs out next year. But just saying, but this is not a project that ends next year, because, like I said, my children have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the gene from them, and I need to make sure that I have set up not just the systems from a health perspective and testing perspective, but also from a whānau perspective, that if I pass away tomorrow unexpectedly, that they have people around them that have the knowledge and the ability to help them through that process, not just, again, like the Parrys and the Sharons sitting over there and the Jeremys, but also that they have the Maybells and the Paulines as well.
Perhaps just one last question. We've travelled with Debbie and Nancy over the last couple of months around the country, rigorous road tour. What do you think makes this research different? Let's start with you, Nancy.
Well, I mean, if you guys got the opportunity to meet Maybell, she is, you could just see, she is just...
Salt of the earth.
Yes, and she... So, yeah, she just, as I think you said, Karyn, she just thinks, oh, this is just normal, she does not see that this has been such an incredible project. But when you actually see everyone together, you can just see everybody is working together on this, and it's just been so inspiring to actually meet all of you and to hear all of this, and just to see how we can do science and really help and save people's lives, and it's just been incredible. So
I think the story has been so inspiring, and I mean it really has been a major piece of work, and so much dialogue has gone on, over so many hui, but you're doing this for our future generations, and so I've learnt a lot actually, while travelling around with you both. Yeah, we've had some good times as well. So, look, thank you,
Hold on, I have a question too. What's your favourite Parry story?
Gosh, we've heard so many, I'd rather not go there.
Oh, well, something about hair dyeing, actually.
To match the eyebrows.
In Dunedin, some very rude person remarked that my hair was not as black as it was in that video, which I think was really unkind.
Well, look, thank you so much, Karyn and Parry. I hope you've all been saving up your questions because we're now going to hand it over to you.
You said you were starting to look at smaller families in New Zealand who may carry this gene. How are you going about trying to identify these families? Is it anecdotal evidence or?
Yeah, a little bit of that, but also what we think we're going to need to do is follow up individuals who have been diagnosed with, or families with one case of stomach cancer or one case of lobular breast cancer. And then if those are young onset, then that would raise red flags with us, and we could then look to test for CH1 in those families. That'll be our first way in.
And to coincide with that is better knowledge dissemination about this. And there's nothing that's kind of, no online presence for this, apart from all of Parry's, news and media things going out there. But in terms of having a landing page for people who think, oh, actually, this might be something that we need to address. So that's also what we are thinking of doing with the funding, the money that we received as well, is creating a better presence of knowledge dissemination.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm Chris Higgins from Rare Disorders New Zealand. What I'm wondering about is the prospects of either editing or repairing the gene so that you prevent the onset of symptoms in the first place.
Yeah, so at the moment you can do IVF, so people can choose IVF and have gene identification done then and choose the embryos. But in terms of actual gene editing, it's the kind of thing that can be done in the lab reasonably easily, but it is still a very long way away from doing gene editing on a walking, talking human. I think it's going to be quite difficult to do it. Certainly it's not possible with current technology, because we're going to have to get that repair construct into every stem cell in the stomach and to really eliminate risk. So I think it's going to be a tough ask to get there, but it will happen. That will be the end of the story when that happens, but it's not close, I don't think.
On the IVF notice point, no one that I spoke to even entertained the idea of going down that pathway. Not to say that that isn't something that they wouldn't want to do in the future. And I think because it's a manageable, reasonably kind of normal living after a gastrectomy, and as Māori as well, we don't plan babies. When I told my partner we were pregnant with our first baby, he goes, "But you don't have a stomach." And I was like, it's because the digestive system and the reproductive system are two different systems. He wasn't as shocked with the second pregnancy. So there's a lot of things, as Māori we don't really plan these things, but that's not to say that it wouldn't be of concern in the future.
Quite a few Pākehā families have had PGD done though, and they have been very happy with that. They can say it's all finished for our family. So it's very much an individual choice for families what they try to do. No answer is right, no answer is wrong.
You've partly, Parry, answered my question, but I wondered has the gene ever affected kind of courting, finding partners? Is that a thing?
Sorry, courting?
Or finding a partner, would they come from I know it seems flippant.
I've never had that question before. I've had most questions, but I haven't had. No, love trumps all.
Kia ora kōrua for your important work. My background's molecular microbiology, so in my head, when I think of stomach cancer, I think pylori. Is there any interaction between pylori and... I realise it's a dominant autosomal, but is there any interaction between
Yeah, there is, but we have seen, and at the start, I talked about the penetrance, the risk of being at about 70%. So 7 out of 10 people with the mutation get cancer, and 3 out of 10 don't. We just thought, it'll be H. pylori will be the cause. It'll be the driver which pushes over. The people who don't get it don't have H. pylori. But we looked, and people around overseas looked as well, and it doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to be a major additional risk factor for this particular cancer.
Yeah, because there's some Marcus Ackman did some interesting work about following pylori through the Polynesian voyages.
Yeah.
So that kind of
in
my head was like, that's interesting.
Yeah, and maybe we have to be a bit more sophisticated and look at particular strains to really answer that question properly. But.
It's a political funding question, because I'm just thinking this is so important. It's such an incredible story, impactful story, and you created such an understanding about how diseases are in our community, hidden, whatever, and you've revealed them. But it's been investigator-initiated. It's actually required a connection through whakapapa. It's so random. There's nothing. What do you think now? Should it, in terms of how should this be set up going forward? You've shown a way. Does it just need to rely on investigator-initiated research and that kind of funding? Or surely now there's an argument that actually there should be not the ministry of such and such, but there's a way forward. It can be more purposefully built, so you're not actually having to hint about Marsden grants, etc., etc. What do you feel about that as investigators? Or do you think that's the healthiest way to keep on doing this, just random HRC, Marsden grants, finding cures for cancer maybe somehow?
Yeah. I think we need to have a mix, Graham. I think I think scientists can get a bit lazy sometimes, especially when it's translational research. It's very easy just to kind of fall off things a bit and go, we haven't figured it out this year, but we'll do it next year. And so I think the competitive grant system does keep a little bit of nerve and edge into the whole process, but it kind of goes too far, because especially at the moment it is appalling. We simply cannot hold a research team together with the HRC's current funding rates. The whole thing is going to fall over for sure. But I think if the HRC was funding about say 30% of applications, then I think that would be quite a good balance. What we're trying to do, so for our own team, we are trying to get stability through donations, and so we're going to build up an endowment fund, and that will mean we will always have funding for HDG research in this country by annual payout from the endowment fund. So that's how we see the future. It'll be an endowment fund giving us some baseline funding, and then continue to apply for grants. But I think I really like the mission-led feel to this project now, rather than just being scientists kind of looking in from the outside. I feel I have jumped onto something, and I'm going for a trip with it. I don't feel like I am leading a project. I'm not saying this is what we need to do. I've jumped onto this bigger organic beast, which is the project, and I'm going with that.
And I guess I'm from humanities, and so we have no money. And we're used to doing, research on the smell of an oily rag. And I'm also Māori, so we even have less money. But we can still feed everybody, right? And we can still be resourceful in the things that we gather together. And so I didn't even know what HRC was until 5 years ago when I first got the Marsden. I didn't even really care about what Marsden was. And so I think, yes, money is important, but for the whānau, it's high stakes. It's more than money. It's the future of our whakapapa. That is more important for us in this process.
Hello, my name is Molly, and I'm a final year genetic counselling student. Excellent talk. I guess as genetic counsellors, we try to not just address the genetic information, but also the psychosocial aspects, support, coping skills, things like that. But given that it is a short intervention, and that you felt that the support sort of goes away after that for people with carriers of genetic conditions, what support do you think would be most helpful for carriers of genetic conditions? Yeah,
I guess I remember at a conference one time and Maui Hudson was talking about this and talking about genetic counsellors. And our genetic counsellors have always been our kaumātua, have always been our aunties and our uncles who have a lived long lives and have all this experience on how to deal with emotions and things like that. And so I think one of those things is to work better with those members of the whānau. At one point, Mabel and Pauline, Pauline maybe mainly, was delivering the results. They were there at every single appointment that these whānau had, and they were the ones to deliver the results and talk people through it. And not one person, I didn't interview one person who did not mention Pauline's work. And so I think that was a really clear indicator for me, the role of our kaumātua in these spaces, and I don't know how you work better with the more senior members of those whānau.
Kia ora, Karyn. Obviously, Mabel was a nurse and actually was the person who reached out, but I wonder whether there's been any kind of halo effects on whānau's engagement with research and healthcare, and whether this has built trust in ways that can be seen more broadly?
Certainly within the McLeods and Tauranga Hospital. The way that they all operate together is really amazing to watch, to see Jeremy and Erin it's really Jeremy and Erin now that have this really close relationship. So Jeremy will often say that when he treats a person for this, he's treating the whole entire whānau. And when he has a consult with one person, half a dozen people turn up. And then the next week it's a consult with another person, and those same half a dozen people turn up. So he's almost like a GP, a surgical GP. So there's been a lot of, it has taken 25 years though to build that trust, because the trust was pretty much gone right at the beginning when Rangi McLeod, the first person to undergo a gastrectomy at Tauranga Hospital, passed away soon after of post-surgical complications. So that trust was gone, and then they went to Auckland and the trust was developed there, just from, I think, being able to have more of a say over how things happened in those spaces. And then it got brought back to Tauranga, to Jeremy, and he's been a consistent surgeon. I don't know about how doctors move around places, but he's had the same surgical team for about 12 years. And so they've been able to really develop processes within Tauranga Hospital. That's not necessarily the same in other centres where whānau are a lot more dispersed. Maybe in Christchurch we can get there with the Ngaitahu whānau out at Tuahiwi, the Solomons. They're a big family, like huge. And I think they might even be bigger than the McLeods. And so I think we can get there with them. And Ross, the surgeon there, has been working with them for quite a few years as well. So it's not one of those instant things that are going to develop trust. It has to take a lot of give and take from both sides.
Okay, last question from Holly.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you very much for your talk. My mum had lobular breast cancer, so I'm just wondering, how easy is it to get a test?
You should ask the counsellor right behind you. Let's do that. Seriously, do you want to answer that question?
I would say go to your GP to get referred. The service is very strained at the moment. In Wellington, there are 3 genetic services, Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, and they will triage the referral and see if it meets the criteria. But the wait list, unfortunately, is about 14 months, and then another wait for the test. So, sorry. But yes, there's private options. The wait list for private, I believe, is about 1 month. How much does it cost? Really put on the spot here. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. $400 to $500.
And therein lies the problem too, right? So this overburdening of a system. And I wonder, so are you doing your masters through a university in Australia? So who's working in hospitals here and can in university, oh I guess it's our university, but can we have a New Zealand based masters in genetic counselling that is more appropriate to working with New Zealand whānau, and who do we need to talk to get that set up so that we can increase, because our Māori are not going to go to Australia to do this. They're not going to give up time to go overseas, and even study online is not really suitable. So how do we bring that degree, that program here? Just a little whittle for you all.
Thank you so much, Karyn. Thank you so much, Parry, and thank you to the other members of your team who aren't here. I think the Prime Minister's Science Prize is there to recognise the most outstanding projects, and this is clearly an example of a really large transdisciplinary project which is drawing together the most cutting-edge genetic biomedical science with ancient traditional knowledge that's been passed on, and with the wisdom of elders, and with a whole lot of people in our healthcare system and in our communities who've all been able to agree on a goal and pull together. So a huge congratulations to you both. I'd also like to just acknowledge Nancy de Bourgia, who's the Communications and Digital Engagement Lead here at the Society. So she's responsible for a lot of the writing that you see for our amazing website, and we're very lucky to have her. And also Debbie Woodhall, who's our Senior Advisor for Strategic Projects and Awards, and who does an incredible job of leading all of the 7 Prime Minister's Science Prizes that we now have. So there are, help me out Debbie, but there's a Space Prize, a Student Space Prize, a Future Scientist Prize, an Emerging Scientist, a Science Communicator, a science teacher, and then the sort of premier prize is the one that this team here has just won. I'd also like to thank those of you in the audience. Those were some pretty good questions, and I suspect that there are some of you here that are working on these areas. So please, you've made it very clear that you're not resting on your laurels now that you've won the prize. You'll still have some huge tasks ahead of you. So I hope that tonight's talk has sparked some new ideas for what's next.